When most sellers hear the term account planning or strategic account planning, they start to get itchy. And I understand that. And I'm trying to solve that in this particular My Sales Day podcast. So, welcome back and thanks for joining. The reason that sellers sometimes feel angst about this exercise is because direction is not clear from management. Therefore, that leads to sellers trying to perform for the manager and not for the good of the exercise. And secondly, it's often hard to figure out what standardization of templates or blueprints need to be followed. That gets addressed in this show with Jeff Zito, a grizzled veteran who, with me, tries to attack this subject and give you some tips and best recommendations on how to strategically think about your accounts, because that is the ultimate goal. You can't be selling out of your inbox forever, and you can't be reacting as a seller. You have to be proactive and you have to be strategic, and that's what we do in this show. So thanks for joining. Now it's time for the My Sales Day podcast featuring Jeff Zito and yours truly.
Sales is hard, brutally hard, and it's messy. Welcome to My Sales Day, a podcast by sellers for sellers. I'm your host, Michael Hess, and it's my job to make sales less messy for you and make sure that by listening to this show, you get skill ideas and action items to help your sales career. You're gonna get some hugs too. Yes, hugs. You need support and you don't often get it from inside your org. And you certainly don't get it from the street. I aim to make your time here educational, inspirational, and actionable. So let's get into it. Jeff Zito, welcome to the My Sales Day podcast. Jeff, I know how you are today, but how are you?
I'm great, Michael. Thank you for asking.
And the reason I said I know how you're doing is because you have some big news to announce, and I think we should lead off with it. So it is your news. Let's tell the world right here on this massive publishing platform known as the My Sales Day podcast.
Thank you. Oh, I am thrilled to announce that I have recently accepted a new role as Regional Vice President at Cadence.
Nice.
Cadence is the combination of ad tech M&A. So Cadence plus Ad Theorem plus View Planner is making us a whole new company.
Congratulations. When did you accept the job? Was it very recent?
I accepted it a couple days ago. I start a week from today.
Oh my God, fantastic. Well, as we publish here and record here in mid-February of 2026, we can, from here on in, track Jeff's progress at Cadent. I should also mention that Jeff and I do come from the media/ad tech industry, even though My Sales Day, both the newsletter and the podcast, has about only 50% of its audience come from ad tech. So this is a show for B2B sellers about B2B selling. So the things that we obviously are going to talk about today are going to refer to anyone who's out there selling anything. But big congrats. I'm sure you feel very excited. So thank you for joining us in your week off.
Thank you very much. Very excited.
Good, good. So our agenda today is something I'm very excited about, and it actually was spurred by you contacting me about a month ago saying that you were on the street looking for work, and then as this Cadent thing started to get really kind of hot, you informed me that they were asking for a 30-60-90. And I said, hey, why don't we do a podcast on 30-60-90s, which mostly refers to that situation when a seller, or in this case, a senior sales executive like Jeff, gets asked to do a plan for, obviously, your first quarter. But then I thought we should dovetail that into what account planning means. Because I think account planning is a subject for most sellers that is kind of a mystery, and more than that, it's intimidating. And I don't want it to be intimidating because it's really, really crucial. So our goal today, Jeff, we are tasking ourselves, is to break down what a solid 30-60-90 looks like, given that you just did one to get this job, to help get this job for you at Cadent, and for us to then segue into what does account planning mean for the modern B2B seller who is running so fast, but yet they understand inherently that they can't manage out of their inbox forever. They got to be proactive. They got to be strategic. So we're going to uncover some of those things for the seller today and hopefully make this time very meaningful. Does that sound good, Jeff?
That sounds good. Yeah, listen, the major difference of being proactive versus reactive can make or break you as a seller.
Big time. Sure. So let us start with your 30, 60, 90, the one that you just did for Cadent. And you can use that as the foundation. But mostly the big opening question is, when they asked you to do a 30, 60, 90, what was your initial reaction in your brain? Were you nervous? Were you like, okay, let's go, I got this? What was your reaction? Because obviously we don't change jobs all the time. So I don't know how many times before you've been asked to do a 30, 60, 90. Walk us through that real quick.
Yeah, this is the first time. I often have had applicants that have been interviewing for roles put together 30, 60, 90-day plans. I, however, had not done that for a new job. So at first I was like, oh, crap, I got to do some work into this thing. But like actually digging into it and putting some elbow grease into it, I was very happy with what I ended up producing. I ended up presenting it to the executive team, and clearly they liked what I had to say. So I think that just going into it with a plan, getting people to trust that you know what you're doing, and here's a framework for how you're going to get it done. Not just talking about it, but actually showing how you're going to accomplish it was all the difference.
When you sat down to do the work, how did you start? Was it in your brain and you just had to get some thoughts out and you knew you could edit it towards a finished product? Or did you consult good old chat and or Mr. Google?
I think it was a combination of both. Typically start everything with AI these days. I'm a big Claude user. It's pretty incredible what that can do for us. But it was a combination of a lot of the sales trainings that you and I have had together. Some of the sales trainings that me and Doug Weaver have had together. You pick up bits and pieces along the way, and then you fuse them together.
I know what the goal was. The goal was to impress upon them that you knew what you were doing. You were able to manage a territory, step in, and move very quickly to not just keep revenue going, but grow it. What were the foundations to the plan? Talk to us a little bit about the foundations that you wrote into the plan that ultimately got presented to them.
Yeah, so I think it's establishing credibility early, right? Establishing credibility that you know what you're doing, that you know what you're talking about, but then again, putting it down on paper, showing that the first 30 days are going to be spent analyzing and asking questions and being curious and getting a firm understanding of like what are some of the issues. Going into the next 30 days of really trying to enable and support and provide, a diagnosis of some of the issues. And then the third phase is really just executing, right? Like understanding what are the objections, who are the competitors, what needs to be done, where's the revenue, where's the opportunity, and really just focusing on getting those first couple deals closed and then replicating that success.
You bring up something that always kind of hit me when I was either asking for 30, 60, 90s or creating them myself, which is for salespeople, after 60, it almost felt like rinse and repeat. And I felt a little sheepish that I wasn't coming up with something more strategic. I'm probably going to solve what I need to do in 60, not 90. So the job is not that challenging. I have to learn the product. I have to dive into my territory. I have to understand the obstacles and the objections. And then it's just about execution. Did you struggle with that 60 to 90 area there and just say, God, I'm just kind of repeating myself, or I'm not offering things that are really that strategic?
No, I think that's where the discipline comes in, right? Once you start to be able to put together skills, repeatable skills, that's where you start to really identify, is it working or is it not working? And then you build from there.
So in the actual 30, 60, 90, which you shared with me, you have days 61 to 90. I'm looking at the document here. And you wrote close and accelerate. And I got to push back a little bit. Is days 61 to 90 closing business? Is that a little extreme in terms of expectations?
Well, closing business can mean a bunch of different things. Sometimes
it can. I only know it to mean one thing, but okay, go on. I'm sorry.
you got to celebrate the mini wins along the way. I learned that early on from a sales trainer, where sometimes getting the IO in the first 60 to 90 days isn't your main objective. Of course, it's the objective that everybody wants, but sometimes you got to get someone to respond to your email first. Sometimes you got to get them to say yes to the lunch. You got to get them to meet you in person. There's a lot of mini wins you can do in the first 90 days outside of, getting that paper off, that'll set you on a trajectory to be successful.
All right, that's fair. I would argue, and again, if we agree on everything, it's going to make for boring podcast, right? But I would argue that that is something that's going to be hard to kind of hold up as an expectation if the seller is closing business in the first, let's say, quarter. It's probably business that was in the pipeline. In other words, it's not business that they have sourced and worked through the funnel. But that depends on the sales cycle for many companies. So some companies are very transactional and they have let's say a 60-day sales cycle. That's fair. You could start closing business at that point. So I'll just counter that with, yeah, you're right. Wins are wins, but closing business to me kind of does mean like you are sourcing business yourself. That's the goal, to get a new seller to do that, and that they're closing the business themselves. Which brings up something that I always struggled with when I received a report from a seller on their 30, 60, 90, when I was the manager and I asked for it. I struggled with their expectations being too high because they felt that it was things that they wanted me to see. They wanted to appear like Superman to me. Do you recall any such instances when you were asking 30, 60, 90s from a new candidate what you received? Like, what was real and what wasn't, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, it's hard to sniff through the BS sometimes, right? Everyone wants to impress their manager. Everyone wants to impress their boss. I think having a realistic expectation between you and the seller of what's going to be considered successful, what's not going to be considered successful, what are the expectations in terms of activity levels, deal sizes, meetings per week, all of these things. I think that if you and your sales manager are on the same page with expectations, it makes everything else a whole lot easier.
It makes it a whole lot easier, and it's easier to focus on where your time is. And so you brought up some things that I think that are really important for the listener to hear right now, and that is, what are your expectations for what you want, let's say, the first 30 days to look like for the new seller? Like when a new seller comes in and they pitch you on the 30, let's just say you got a 30, 60, 90, and you look at the 30, what do you want to see in those first 30 that you're like, okay, this person's going to succeed?
Master your territory, know every single account inside and out, audit your pipeline, what's real, what's garbage, and start prospecting immediately. Like, don't wait to be perfect. I think too many sellers wait too long before they have the pitch perfect before they really start to go out there and prospect. Like, you can't wait for that. You need to get the pipeline moving. You need to have that proactive outreach. You need to know that it's going to take you a week or two to get a meeting. And in those next 2 weeks, you will be far more up to speed on what your value proposition is.
I couldn't agree more. There was a seller named Kate, and Kate had trouble feeling that confidence to get into market. She would say to me, I can't go sell, I can't prospect until I know everything I want to know about the product. And I tried to work with Kate, and she's a fantastic seller to this day. But I was pushing for, let the buyer train you, let the buyer coach you. So how do you, if you have that type of seller who is reluctant, what do you do to make them feel more comfortable?
I think you give them a framework. You give them a framework, you give them a process. Maybe you go and find some friendlies for them to go talk to, and give them a couple layups where they're not walking right into the lion's den meeting with the chief investment officer. You can have a couple meetings along the way to just get them warmed up to a certain extent.
My goal always as the manager was, and I agree with you, give them a framework, and let's be more detailed on that. Frameworks for me are scripts on the most important things. Get them an email script on prospecting, which of course means that you have to train them right away on the value prop. there are three things that I would hand to a new seller or a new manager coming into my organization right away. I'd say, you gotta memorize these things before you even start. Number one, common questions. These are the common questions you're going to hear from a buyer. And when a seller who doesn't know what a sales call, what a pitch meeting looks like for this new company receives a document like that, now they're prepared. They know it's coming. Number two, top objections. And we all know for every one of our offerings that are out there, there's only, 3 to 5 common objections. And 3 out of the 5 are probably the real ones that are sticky, like you just have a gap and they come up. So the faster you can train people on the objections, the value prop, and the top questions, then I think they're ready. Then I think it just becomes, here's the phone book, go get a meeting. Have you witnessed any? Yeah.
In your first 90 days, right, there's three things that need to happen, right? You establish your credibility with your customers, with your manager, with your team. You build your foundation, right? The pipeline you create now is what you're going to spend the next 3 quarters closing. And then you prove yourself, right? You prove that you know how to source meetings. You prove that you can operate within the meeting. And you prove that you're able to create more opportunities down the road. If you can do those 3 things in your first 90 days, like, you're really setting yourself up for success for the year.
Yeah, my goal is always get them on the phones as fast as possible. People are listening saying we don't use the phone anymore, and I call BS on that. Buyers still pick up their phone. You can't just survive on email prospecting alone, but get them on the phones, get them on the email prospecting as fast as possible. And again, those 3 checkpoints: top questions, top objections, top value prop. And if somebody has all those nailed before they walk in to the job on the first day, now I can work on some other things inside the organization, teach them, coach them on protocol, procedure, navigation. Because I think that's the other thing that kind of gets lost, which is how new sellers and new managers feel inside the organization. Actually, they feel lost. That's what they feel. They don't know the protocols. They don't know where to go for this, where to go for that. So you have 2 walls that you have to get over really quickly. It's the feeling comfortable in front of the customer, but it's also the product, the inside navigation. What have you done with the inside navigation to help speed seller orientation and activation?
So I want to credit this one to Doug Weaver. What's the most difficult thing about painting a house or painting a room? And it's the prep work that goes into it, right? It's not the actual painting. I think most reps make the mistake of just getting started without a plan. The winners spend the first week getting organized, prepping the painting job, putting all the tape in, making sure that everything's ready to go. If you go into it with a plan, you're going to be far more successful.
Yeah, the taping around the windows, taping around these electric sockets, all those things take so much time.
I mean,
You're right.
being able to categorize all your accounts. Everybody knows the 80-20 rule, but do you understand who are your biggest revenue potential? Do you understand where the solid opportunities are, and what's the long tail? What are the small deals that shouldn't require as much focus but are critically important to your building of your pipeline?
What do you think about that technique, talking about CRM, where the manager just says, here's your username, here's your password, go to work, start reading?
Yeah, it depends on the seniority of the hire, right? Like, someone coming out of the agency in their first couple of years of a sales job, that's not going to be a successful strategy. Someone more seasoned, someone more tenured, someone who's been through this before, sure, they should be able to pick it up and get running. But a little bit of guidance along the way is going to be critically helpful to the expectations.
I would agree. In fact, everything about my approach when I was a manager was, I can't make an assumption that you know how to navigate our version of Salesforce.com. I can't make an assumption that you know all the fields where they are, et cetera. And so I would do two things. I would say, hey, Fred, one of my top sellers, I need you to put an hour in with this new candidate, this new seller, and walk them around, give them a tour, literally do some data entry, because there's always time when data entry is needed by any seller. So Fred, show them how to record an account, show them how to move something through the pipeline, show them how to change a field. Then turn it around and have the user, new seller, go into their CRM with their hands on the keyboard and show what they just learned. But the old way of just giving somebody the username, password, and saying, get up to speed, I see why it's a default action by a lot of companies, a lot of managers. But if we as sales managers are operating under the premise of speed to market and get this seller in front of a customer as fast as possible, which is the ultimate goal, then I don't know why that sales manager would not accelerate that process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Being able to reduce the time, the speed to market, the speed to close, being able to shrink that is a core job of a sales manager who enables people to understand what it takes to be able to do that.
How many hours should a new seller be working in the first week?
50? 50 or more? In this game, right? In this sales game, you are your own small business. You can make as much or as little as you want. You can put in as much effort or as little effort as you want. But there is no more 9 to 5. Your ability to navigate your territory and your hurdles and your customers comes down to how much effort.
I used to put Friday at 4 p.m. as the meeting when that seller had to sit down with me and do a mini role play on objections and questions and value prop. And I'll tell you why. It was day 5 of their career, assuming they started on Monday. I wasn't looking for perfect after 5 days. I was looking for effort. And I knew that if I put pressure on them for that first week, that I had a chance they would be jumping on the phones and the email for prospecting on day 6 of their career, the following Monday. And I would tutor them in that meeting, and I would definitely ease their pain and say, we're going to talk about it. I wouldn't use the word role play. I would just, the calendar invite would say objection handling, common question, value prop, discussion. But I would move into mild role plays in those meetings because I wanted to create a little tension. And I wanted actually 50 plus hours out of that seller in the first week. Now, many sellers are listening to me saying, what are you talking about? Well, I refer a lot in the newsletter and in this podcast to this ideal group of sellers called the top 10%. And the top 10% are basically those who make the top of the leaderboard each and every quarter with quota attainment. And I don't know how you get to the top 10% if you're not busting it.
Going back to being proactive versus reactive, right? The proactive ones are the ones that are going to be in that top.
Okay, so I dug out a first 30 plan. I had a client hire me about 2 years ago, and they came to me with the challenge of our reps. You're going to fall off your chair. In fact, I will tell you after this podcast, you know this company, but I'm not going to admit it publicly. You know them. They came to me 2 years ago and they said, it is taking us 14 months to get production out of a new hire. 14 months.
That's a long
time. That is too long. And basically, I did a lot of probing and I diagnosed a lot of weakness in the execution and, as you had mentioned a few times, the planning, the frameworks, et cetera. And it's just as simple as that. It's building frameworks. It's building a planning protocol. It's doing things like saying, week 2, you better be prospecting. You better have your first meeting that you sourced by the end of the first 30 days. In fact, there was a goal for meetings. I'll look at it in a minute because I dusted off the first 30 plan. But I I went to such an extreme on moving that number for them from 14 months down to like something reasonable. And to be fair, their selling cycle was about 6 months. Okay. It took about 5 to 6 months to source and close business. So 14 months sounds not so bad versus, let's say it was a 2 month cycle or a 3 month cycle, right? That would be like WTF. So here are some of the things. So I said, you're not going to do 30, 60, 90s. You're just going to do something called a first 30 with the sellers because you have to get these people going really hard, fast. So that's where the whole 60 hours week one came from. Okay, here was number one on the list. Join 25 plus live meetings with clients and sellers in the first 30 days. Join, meaning I need a participation by all the other sellers to bring this person on a call. But think about that. If you are a new seller and you're seeing 25 examples of a sales call in your first 4 weeks, maybe starting week 5, I don't even have to go on a meeting with you. You've seen so much action.
Well, and also it's not that it was ever easy to get meetings, but it's certainly not any easier these days. One could argue with so many meetings taking place on Zoom, sure it could be, but shadowing, right? Like being able to shadow somebody when they go on a real life interaction is incredibly important. Equally important is the role playing. I think that you and I have been working together for a long time, so I've definitely pushed down the role playing exercises that we have done. But you can substitute some of those meetings for role plays with other reps. When I onboarded when I would onboard a new employee, I would have them meet with 5 to 6 of their peers, not necessarily in the same region. I would prefer them to be in other regions sometimes because different regions operate differently. But then being able to role play those scenarios in real time is incredibly impactful.
Very good point. And now a word from our sponsor. What a coincidence. Today's My Sales Day podcast sponsor is the My Sales Day newsletter. If you're enjoying the show and you want frequent, directional, and inspirational selling ideas, then the My Sales Day newsletter is for you. If I told you that going to the skills gym each day would cost you only 2 minutes of attention, you would sign up in a second. That's the premise of the newsletter. Early each morning, a punchy, action-oriented skill reco comes to your box, focusing you for the day. Who doesn't have 2 minutes to work on their skill development and career growth? The risk of not subscribing to My Sales Day might seem insignificant until you imagine your competitors reading it. Get an edge. Put in the time. Head to mysalesday.io after this show. Or heck, why wait? Pause the show, head over to mysalesday.io and subscribe. Better habits, better selling. How did you deal in those instances when you hired somebody new? How did you deal with the person who didn't hit those goals? Like you said, I want, 60 outbounds the first week. I want 10 meetings booked by week 3, whatever it is. How did you deal with underachievement?
I mean, you have to be firm. You have to be firm. You can't make excuses. You can't treat employees differently. And sometimes when people weren't hitting their requirements of activity levels or quotas or mainly activity levels, I would start going on meetings with them again. I would show up in market and I would say, we need 5 meetings over these next 2 days. I would try to lead by example and show them how I would handle that situation. I mean, there's been times where I've frozen people's T&E because I felt like they were spending too much time on events and games and not enough time in the boardroom and having actual meetings. There's a lot of different levers you can pull there, but holding them accountable is probably the most important piece.
Well, you've always done that as a manager, and I respect that. And if there's a manager out there who's not putting minimum requirements down on paper or the cloud, whatever it is, I don't know how there's any kind of performance mandate in that particular organization, because that's rule number one. We have to feed the pipeline. So That's an easy one in the first 30. Let me pick some
And
that might be a little, yeah.
so let me say one thing. It's not easy, right? I think when you go and tell someone that they have to have 5, 6, 7, 8 meetings a week, at first we're like, oh, it's a lot of meetings. But the reality is like that's what it takes. These days, with as competitive as things are, with the advancements in AI, Weaver had actually a good quote. It wasn't his quote. It was somebody from like the Pentagon or the Defense Department. When people were talking about change and how change is difficult, and like you might not like change, but you're going to like irrelevance even less. And in a day and age where AI is doing a lot of the jobs that traditional salespeople have been doing, it's never been more important to get face to face with your clients. And if you can get people to accept a certain level of expectations and activity levels, I think that once you get that baseline, you're going to see who can do it and who can't do it.
Yeah, you're right. Here's another one on the list that feeds to what you had mentioned earlier in terms of the role playing inside of the organization. And this one was specifically, again, designed to get the seller out in the field as fast as possible. And it was basically pitch practice with a peer. So they had to sit down with one of their peers and run a sales meeting, a mock sales meeting. And again, I felt that that was important because there's so many different things that they can learn. And there was a number against that. They like had to do 5 of those in the first 4 weeks or 6 of those, whatever it was. And I thought that was an incredible learning experience because every seller that they pitch inside of that org is going to give a different perspective on how they talked about the value prop, how they dealt with a particular product feature, and they're going to add some information and knowledge that I think was vital to that person's education. Again, the whole goal is how fast can I get that seller on the street feeling confident, feeling comfortable? Because the goal is for you, the manager, to see that person make a sale without your involvement.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, listen, practice, practice, practice. Nail your demo, whether it's with your peers or if it's recording yourself. I'm a big fan of recording yourself, and it's painful to watch yourself, as you know, sometimes. But being able to role play the objection handling with your manager, with your peer, being able to really study your competitors. Where do we win? Where do we lose? And having acceptance of those key factors is going to propel you to.
So I think we did a pretty good job on the 30, 60, 90. Obviously, the dynamics change for somebody like you, which we touched on, which you're a senior leader. Your 30, 60, 90 is going to be different than what a seller needs to think about. Far more focused, far more linear for a seller. Get meetings, learn the product, get in the field. That's basically the mandate, right? Let's pivot to something, I don't want to call it controversial, but I just want to say it's hard. And that is account planning, the last segment of this podcast. Account planning, I say, is hard for most sellers because it doesn't matter the industry you're in, doesn't matter the segment, doesn't matter what B2B kind of field that you are in, what product you're selling. The bottom line is most sellers today, if not all, are being whipsawed by time and this horrible, horrible notion that email runs our world. I call it, we sell out of our inbox, which is the most horrible defensive position to be in as a seller. What does account planning mean to Jeff Zito when I say account planning as a sustained practice for a seller? What does that mean to you?
I think that's the moment when you shift from being reactive to being strategic. If you do it right, it's the highest leverage activity that you can have as a sales manager, being able to go into it with a clear and actionable plan.
Did you ever receive formal training on what account planning means, either as a seller when you were being managed or in any of the training that you got from Doug Weaver or Michael Hess? Anything?
Yeah, it didn't so much come from the sales trainers that I've worked with over the years. I'm not going to say his name. There was a gentleman when during the acquisition spree that I went through, going from Yumi to Rhythm One to Tremor. During the Rhythm One days, we hired an executive vice president who came from Oracle. Very, very process driven, like process overload. It was more than I'd ever seen in my entire career. Hated it at the time. Had to go through all these hoops and all these steps, and it took weeks, and then I had to present it. I remember being up at my cabin in New Buffalo on Memorial Day weekend, practicing and prepping and role playing. And I hated it at the time, but I still use those fundamentals to this day because it really is that important. And if you have a strong structure and a framework to follow, it can be your North Star and it can guide you through it.
To the point that it's painful, but it works. So what are some of those elements that you want to share as part of, again, account planning? What are some of those things that stood with you that you still do?
Having a clear idea of where you're at. Like, where are you actually at? Not where you want to be, or not like where your team might think that they are, but like, how are you pacing the quota? What was the prior year's comps? Is there seasonality in it? Have things changed with the client or the agency? Being able to look at it from a tactical level to understand what is going to be the most meaningful piece of it, that's always a good start. Being able to segment out your accounts, one of the process things we did here with this particular gentleman was the minnow, dolphin, whale analysis of really truly understanding where the revenue is going to come from and where you should be spending your time accordingly, and not wasting time chasing minnows when it's going to need a whale or two for you to be able to hit your quotas.
Love that. I love that. And therefore, when you put a lens out there that you're looking at, it becomes clear, I think they're a minnow, I'm not going to spend time there, or the minnow could be a dolphin. And that's obviously what needs to be justified and defended by the seller when the manager says, why are you spending all your time over there?
One of the things I focus on a lot is, going into the new year, what do you need to protect? What do you need to retain? Like, what can't leave your book of business? And what are you going to do to keep it in there? What do you need to grow from a dolphin to a whale, or a minnow to a dolphin? Arguably, very much important as well. And then just being able to kind of manage the risk in those accounts and understanding the opportunities and where the white space is.
I'm sure there were fields in a spreadsheet probably back then. It wasn't cloud-based, but there were fields that you had to fill in. And at the end of the day, a SWOT analysis is probably going to do it and get it done in some sort of an account planning mode. And you got to know your risks. You got to know where the objections are. You got to know where the obstacles are, obviously. So I think the point that we can help the seller out there with an account plan is to make their system as easy as possible. And this is, by the way, where I should talk to the sellers out there who may not participate in any kind of a formal process. There still are sales organizations out there that do not administer a formal account plan process. And if that's the case, I say to those sellers, you don't listen to this and say, yeah, I dodged a bullet. You listen to this and say, this is my opportunity to really excel. And you need to do this on your own. For me, I'm trying to make things as easy as possible to my Sales Day audience, to anybody who listens, mostly because I like things that are easy. And I always, with my account plans, I taught a 4P kind of approach, and I'll share them here. It was people, number one, product, positioning, and pipeline. And people was very simple. Who do I have to see in the next 90-day quarter? You and I are talking in mid-February. The P part of the account plan for Q2 is, who is my target list to get a meeting with in Q2? Because, of course, the implications are, based on my sales cycle, that's going to affect revenue in Q3, Q4, Q1 2027, right? So the P is people, first one. Second P, product. I go right to objections. What are the threats? What are the objections? And again, listing them out and identifying them and naming them and labeling them is really important. It speeds conversations between the seller and the manager, and it helps the seller articulate, geez, what am I going to do about this? The third one, positioning, is about value prop. Hopefully, everybody who's listening has a company value proposition that's official and it's handed down by hopefully a confluence of people and collaborative efforts. But every account needs some sort of tweaking to that value prop. And since we are talking about account planning specific to your top 5, your top 10, your top 30 accounts, depending on how the weight of your revenue falls, you need to look at your value proposition framed for that account. Literally, write it out. What's my best pitch here? And then the final P is pipeline. And it's basically, to your point, where do I stand? Where am I? What's going on? And I noticed a part of your 30, 60, 90 that you had submitted for this job that you just nailed. It's the truth. You wrote the words brutal truth, because falsehoods obviously don't really work too well when we're lying to ourselves about pipeline. Pipeline also, by the way, from an account planning perspective, I think it's the hardest thing because it forces us back into the market to go to the buyer and say, hey, where are we? Because if you want your account plan to actually be valid and to be strong and truthful and accurate, the information has to be accurate. So the pipeline can't really run off assumptions. It's got to run off facts.
Yeah, I mean, I remember something you told me early on in our sales training of whenever starting a new role or new position or new territory. You said, call your top 5 to 10 clients immediately. Say, I'm your new rep. I want to understand your business. I'd love to learn some about the challenges that you're facing and see where we can help. And that's something I've tried to do every step of the way, whether it was taking on a new territory or taking on some new clients, is getting them on the phone and really just listening to the first P in your 4 Ps is what do the people have to say?
That might be a philosophy or an approach that needs to be enhanced a little bit. Enhanced in terms of that seller may need counseling from the sales manager on what can I bring the person? What's new in the company? Because an appeal to a buyer just for, hey, you sit down with me and tell me what you need sounds a lot like I'm drafting off you. And buyers might get a little itchy about that. They want something in return. So when I say an adjustment to that approach, that's what I'm referring to. It's like, I'd like to hear what's new. And I'd like to also update you on the things that I'm learning about that I think could be new for you from our end.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So are there any other elements of an account plan that you think are important that aren't covered by my 4 Ps or your minnow, dolphin, whale? Anything that we need to shed light on for the listener before we part?
Relationship mapping. Having one single point of contact is sometimes a single point of failure. Far too often people rely on building a champion and feeling comfortable that person's got my back, or they're a big fan of mine. When in reality, they could be gone next week. They could be moved to a different account next month. And then where are you at? Then you have no other champions on that account. So being able to really identify the gaps in your relationships and identify who are the right people that you need to be talking to. Do you have the right amount of coverage across that account?
We're going to wrap this up with one thing. What's the one thing you want the listener to take from today's show? And maybe we could break it down, one thing on the 30, 60, 90 and one thing on the account plan. Or one thing, I don't care, whatever you want.
Let's stick with the account plan. I think some of the best account plans that I've received have been account plans that I've worked on with the reps. Not just giving them a framework and said, hey, fill this out. And, it's plain vanilla. It's similar from rep to rep. But the ones that the sellers, the reps, really take ownership of, those are the ones that are the most successful. Those are the ones that drive follow through. Those are the ones I can tell they put the time into it. They didn't just do the exercise to check the box, but they actually put the appropriate amount of time into it. and they're proactive about it. And I know that they're going to do this every quarter, whether I ask them to do it or not.
That's a great point. I guess the one thing for me, and I have nothing to add to that because it's so perfect. The one thing for me is this concept of how do you get a seller as proactive and strategic as fast as possible? And I think that applies to both the first 30 or 30, 60, 90 or the account plan, which is how can the seller do it her or himself? And I think we exposed a lot of good ideas today. And number two, how can the manager help? Because with each passing day, we get closer to the end of the quarter and we lose the opportunity to book the revenue for that particular quarter. And that is the game. That's the game. Yeah. Jeff, Zito, I'm going to let you go because, man, you got some rest and relaxation in the next few days before you get to start your job. Or actually, we could pivot and say you've got a lot to learn in terms of objections and common questions for your new gig, because that meeting is going to come up soon with your new manager. What did you enjoy about our show besides dropping a bunch of Doug Weaver lines on me?
Oh, the playful banter. Yeah, it's great working with you, Michael. And
the violent agreement, right?
Exercise, sales training, skill development. It's a muscle. Your slogan, better habits, better selling, like nothing could be more true. And the more work you the more work you put into these things, the more value.
Most definitely. And we can't stand flat-footed anymore. We have to be investing in our careers and investing in our skills and thinking about this stuff all the time. All the time. So that's the reminder for those people who joined us today. You joined because you're trying to be the best sales professional you can be. You're trying to be in the top 10%. And you can only do that with continued study, with continued self-appraisal, and by continuing to listen to experts like Jeff and reading the My Sales Day newsletter. If you're listening and you're not a subscriber to the My Sales Day newsletter, please come on in. We'd love to have you as part of the family. Go to mysalesday.io and sign up as a subscriber. Jeff, thank you again, sir. This was a treat.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for listening to My Sales Day. It was great having you here. For more, listen to our other episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, leave us a review. I care what you think. And because I'm a seller like you, I got thick skin, so I can take anything you got. You can also visit mysalesday.io to join our email list and community dedicated to sellers just like you. My Sales Day is a podcast by sellers for sellers. And if you got something out of today's episode, help out a friend by sharing this episode with them. My Sales Day is proudly produced in partnership with Westport Studios. Views and opinions expressed by guests on My Sales Day are their own and may not reflect the views and opinions of their organization. Start your sales day the right way with My Sales Day. I'll see you in our next episode and in the daily newsletter.